to welcome everyone to our online panel discussion, Dogmas of the New Era. This discussion panel is held as a part of the international conference, PALE 2020. This conference had an international status. Over the course of 1 week, you will hear discussions of 20 famous scientists from 9 countries. We can state that this is the first conference of such serious level devoted to the problem of peace, world, life in the post-pandemic period. We appreciate your presence at this difficult time, the time of COVID-19. So we'd like to extend a special welcome to our honorable guests, and let me introduce the key speakers. Dr. Massimo Introvigne, professor, sociologist of religion, a founder and the managing director of the Center for Studies of New Religions. He was a representative of combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, with a special focus of discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. Thank you for your participation, Dr. Introvigne. Next speaker is Professor Lyudmila Filipovich. She is a doctor of philosophy, religious scholar, professor. She is also the head of Department of Philosophy and History of Religion in Institute of Philosophy of National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine and professor of National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Vice President of the Ukrainian Association of Religious Studies, Executive Director of the Center for Religious Information and Freedom of the Ukrainian Association of Religion Studies. Thank you for your participation, Professor Filipovich. Willy Fautré, Dr. Willy Fautré, the Director of Human Rights Without Frontiers International, honorary member of the Strategic Council of the Institute of Human Rights and Prevention of Extremism and Xenophobia, member of the International Consortium of Law and Religion Studies, former member of the Advisory Board of the European Parliament Platform for Secularism in Politics, former charge de mission at the Cabinet of the Ministry of Education and de mission at the Belgian Parliament. Thank you, dear Dr. Fautré.
Thank you very much.
Let me introduce the Professor Dr. Oleg Maltsev, the famous researcher, criminologist, psychologist, academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, founder and director of the Memory Institute, head of the Odessa Regional Branch of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, head of the Expeditionary Corpus, Odessa Photographic Scientific Society. He is a famous author of numerous books in the area such as applied history, sociology, depth psychology, philosophy, criminalistic criminology. Thank you for your participation, dear Dr. Maltsev. And let me introduce the Professor Maxim Lepsky. He is Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, Professor of Department of Sociology, Faculty of Sociology and Management of the Parisian National University. He is also Chairman of the Social Forecasting Research Committee of the Sociological Association of Ukraine. Thank you, Professor Lepsky, for your participation in this discussion. And dear colleagues, pay attention please to the rules of today's online discussion. We started the panel at 9 and plan to finish by 11 p.m. We need to discuss 4 topics, 4 issues. And we will be happy to give each speakers near 5-7 minutes for presentation. And sometimes I will kindly inform you of the need to finish your report, sometimes. And I proposed the next line of speakers for each issue. Dr. Massimo Introvigne will begin the discussion, then Professor Lyudmila Filipovich, then Dr. Willy Fautré, then Dr. Oleg Maltsev will continue, and Professor Maxim Lepsky will conclude the discussion. So Dr. Massimo Intravinia, Professor Ludmila Filipovich, Dr. Willy Fortrea, Dr. Oleg Maltsev, and Professor Maxim Lepsky. So these some rules for our today's discussion. And let me propose for you to start the discussion around the first question. The first question is, no one anticipated neither the pandemic's threat nor the consequence that followed. But where is religious foreknowledge, which has to have corresponding prognosis? Please, Dr. Massimo Intravinia, start this discussion.
Well, the question is indeed intriguing, but it depends, of course, on which religion we are dealing with. In fact, most world religions do not believe their leaders have prophetic powers. That may be true for some forms of New Age religions or some new religious movements, but in Christianity, for example, a good number of denominations are what scholars will call cessationist. What does it mean, cessationist? That phenomena like prophecy basically ended with the time of the apostles. That's the majority position in the mainline Protestant world, for example. So surely the leaders of the largest Christian churches do not believe they have prophetical powers. Your question remains interesting, however, because as I wrote in some comments in Italian mainline daily newspapers, what we saw, which may be cause for concern in mainline Christian churches, is a certain lack of leadership. In epidemics of old, like in the plague in the Middle Ages, but as recently as the Spanish influenza plague in the 20th century, we had seen the mainline churches being moral leaders of their countries. The opinion of the mainline churches was extremely important, and the populations looked at the churches for leadership, direction, and comfort. That didn't happen this time, even in a country where the church is so much present as Italy. We have seen that the leadership has been taken by medical doctors, academics, experts in epidemics, and to some extent politicians. The leadership of the church has been very weak, perhaps at the level of the Pope. There has been some strongly symbolic events, but there is a big difference with other national crises, that the presence of the church has been somewhat weak. So I wouldn't blame at least in Europe or in the West, Christianity for not having prophetic skills, able to anticipate the pandemic. Modern Christianity doesn't claim this, but I would say it's a reason of concern that the Christian authorities didn't completely offer leadership in the time of such a massive crisis.
Thank you, Dr. Intravinia. And we ask Professor Filipovich to continue this discussion.
Thank you very much. I invite everyone to think about new information which we share one another, because it's very important to compare the situation in different countries. And I focuses on Ukraine, but I am not agree with the main this question that no one was ready to these pandemic events. I think that some predicted, in particular, for example, the creators of virus, and maybe someone from from the security service, epidemical, they are ready always to meet such dangerous like virus. So now we need to think how to teach the people to protect themselves from chemical and bacteriological weapons. I remember, for example, from my childhood, when I study in school, I know how to defend myself from such virus and from such dangerous. There are people who are preparing for such pandemics, building especially in rooms. I saw several videos how they are ready to meet such dangerous. This is like a bunker. This is all necessary for the long staying here in this bunker. But telling about the religious organization, I think that we have some radical organization among believers who are ready for such threatening challenges. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they are ready everywhere, every time, because they believe in apocalyptic prophecies, and they know very well what will happen in what order, what to do in different steps of all these process. I think that, for example, the Adventists, they know what to do like Jehovah's Witnesses. I could remember the Russian group of New Testament led by its leader Vissarion. Maybe you know this group. This is Oleg Torop. He was in past the policeman. So he, for a long time, he training here believers in Siberia on the Telbin Lake, how to prepare for the end of the world. They, for example, minimize their production and consumption. They live in a very close settlement. They minimize the communication with the world. They provide the healthy way of life, physical training, and many others things. In general, I think that the human are not ready for such terrible virus like COVID-19. And what the situation show that we are very unprepared and very irresponsible in such situation. And I think that now we see that many people, they are against the law, they against the solution of civic power, and what we have, that the disobedience to the law is stronger than the law, and I don't know how to overcome such irresponsible of the human. What could I continue? I think that we could think about the results of this COVID-19. We could not predict what happened in 25 years, but now if we assume the different thoughts of different experts, we could predict the nearest future, for example, for the nearest year. And what we see, we could see the catastrophe for our situation, because we will have the falling of living standards, the rising poverty, the unemployment, the rising food prices, the neglect of entire areas of activity. For example, the treats for the culture, education, small and medium-sized businesses, especially tourism industry, sports, medicine, and many, many other spheres of our life. And I try to listen many different experts. I am not an expert in, for example, economic life or social life. I try to think about the results of this COVID-19 for the religious life, for the religious organization. And we expect, me personally, I expect two different scenarios of the after COVID-19 situation. One of these, this is the falling of the religious life, the minimizing even and the losing the numbers of believers. But on the other hand, we could expect the imagine the new type of belief, a new type of religious organization, because traditional one, I agree with the Professor Introvigne, are not ready to get adequate answer to these dangers. So it will be very interesting times for academic investigators, because we are in the middle of the burning of a new religious reality. And I could maybe later to show this burning of new reality on the Ukrainian cases.
Thank you, Professor Filipovich. And we ask Dr. Willy Fautré to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So I'm speaking on, let's say, on the name of Human Rights Without Frontiers International, which perceives and studies the pandemic and its impact on religious freedom around the world from that very specific perspective. And so we've noticed that since the beginning of the pandemic, the world has been turned on its head. With the pandemic shutting down economies, we have noticed that the discrimination of religious minorities has intensified across the world, especially politically marginalized religious minorities that were already in that situation before the pandemic. And that has happened in all countries around the world, in authoritarian regimes, but also in democracies, and including in Europe, in the EU in particular. The question of religious discrimination in this time of the pandemic has to be viewed in conjunction with three elements. First, the nature of the political system in a given country, authoritarian versus, let's say, democratic regimes. Two, the extent of social and cultural harmony in that given society. And last but not least, the level of influence of non-state actors that have to shape, that have the opportunity to shape in a positive but also negative way the social harmony. In particular, entities committing extremist acts, so that's on the negative side, against religious minorities, and also anti-cult organizations. So there, we have noticed that first, there has been such discrimination that already existed before the pandemic, but that have been suddenly highlighted more than ever in a number of countries, in China, of course, first with the Uyghurs, and I can go in details later on, but also in India, where minority Tablighi Jamaat was especially scapegoated, and I can also explain in details what happened, but quite recently as well in France, in the region of the northeast of France, in the region of Mulhouse. And I can also explain in details what had happened. That, in fact, a phenomenon that we have been used to for decades, I would say, was suddenly reactivated and intensified in such countries where already marginalized religious minorities were in trouble. So that means that suddenly, for example, it happened in France, a politician, a minister, started criticizing a specific religious minority, an evangelical mega church, and that was aired by all the media without any control, without any cross-checking investigation. And suddenly they were stigmatized, they got threats from even members of the families, from neighbors and other sources. So we already knew that phenomenon. In fact, it's not new, it was just reactivated and intensified. So this is one of the main aspects that, one of the main consequences, I would say, of the pandemic. And that's that aspect that we are scrutinizing and investigating at Human Rights Without Frontiers. But we also have collected a number of data, information, news about groups that, let's say, refused, even in the United States or in Europe, especially I think of some Orthodox countries, where the clerics, where the religious leadership was refusing to follow the secular laws, putting the religious laws above the laws of the state, and so disregarding the restrictive measures that were imposed on anybody, any group, whatever the age of people, the sort of association, civil or religious or other. So we are also investigating that tension between some religious groups and states that erupted in a number of countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fautré. And we invite the Dr. Maltsev to continue.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Я тут, наверное, самый нетитулованный спикер из всех.
Probably among all of the speakers, I'm the one that has less titles.
И в этом, наверное, мое преимущество.
And probably perhaps this is my privilege and advantage.
Да, я могу не придерживаться политических каких-то ограничений, когда буду говорить.
In my case, when I will be speaking, it will be possible for me not to abide strictly by all this political, let's say, restrictions.
Я, в общем-то, был в самом центре пандемии, когда она началась и когда она продолжалась в Европе.
When the pandemic had started, I was in the epicenter of it.
Да, и вопросы «зачем» и «почему» — это как раз те вопросы, в которых я в науке специализируюсь.
And the questions as why and what for are my main specialties in the science.
Очень многие ученые, они как бы занимаются какими-то другими вопросами, но меня больше всего интересуют вопросы «зачем» и «почему».
Different scientists tackle different questions, but in my case, main questions that interest me is why and what for.
Когда мы говорим, почему великие религии, столько лет существующие, не предсказали пандемию, нужно вернуться к представлению о том, что то, что спрашивается в этом вопросе, оно связано в религиозном мире с пророчеством неким.
So when the question is about why main world religions that had been allegedly existing for many, many years were not able to foresee this basically the crisis, this question is about prophecy.
Дело в том, что пророчество — это очень мощный инструмент в руках религиозного аппарата.
And when we speak about prophecy, it's something that doesn't belong to anybody. Nobody is responsible for it, but it's a very powerful tool in the hands of pious.
Он действительно очень мощный, если ты им умеешь пользоваться.
And it is in fact very powerful, but only in the case one can handle it properly.
Но когда ты не умеешь пользоваться этим инструментом, да, то, безусловно, ты им не сможешь воспользоваться в любой ситуации.
And certainly if the clergy or whoever is not capable of handling this tool, the prophecy tool, in a correct manner, then it doesn't matter if it's pandemics or whatever the situation, they will not be able to use it properly.
Преимущество инструмента пророчества заключается в том, что за него никто не отвечает.
And the main advantage of the tool that we have called prophecy is the fact that nobody is responsible for it.
Ну, то есть это откуда-то оттуда, свыше, и даже если кто-то там передумал свыше, то ничего страшного.
It is something abstract that comes from somewhere from higher ways, something divine.
Вот эти люди, которые называются священниками на земле, за небесную канцелярию ответственности не несут.
And certainly priests, people on earth, they are not responsible for what has divine provision decided for them.
Как вы понимаете, это некая шутка или аллегория.
So this is a certain kind of allegory or a joke, if you may.
Так вот, для того, чтобы что-то спрогнозировать, это можно сделать двумя методами.
So consequently, in order to foresee something, in order to prognose something, there are two ways to do that.
То есть либо при помощи каких-то аналитических способностей,
First, this is about some kinds of analytical skills,
либо с помощью какого-то божественного дара, который там ночью тебе приснилось, что-то как бы, или Бог тебе что-то сказал, и это оказалось, ну, действительно так.
or a divine way of doing something, as if you have seen a dream or something abstract from this category.
Да. Но, к сожалению, сегодняшние религии давно уже великих не видели, никаких.
However, unfortunately, currently, when we speak about main religions, there are like no great ones. They haven't been around for a long time.
Они давно превратились, по сути, в неких функционеров.
And in fact, priests today, they have turned into a functionary man.
То есть функционеры, они ничего не способны прогнозировать ни при помощи аналитического аппарата, человеческого разума, ни при помощи каких-то сверхспособностей человеческих.
And since the church and religion became a piece of administrative apparatus, it means that they are incapable of making predictions or having a foreknowledge by using analytical skills or divine skills.
То есть, по сути своей, за последние 100 лет мы не видели как бы ни одного человека, который мог бы что-то предсказать, и это предсказание бы действительно сбылось, и это касается непосредственно религиозных как бы движений, не касаемо использования аналитического как бы аппарата, не касаемо использования каких-то сверхспособностей.
So if we are speaking only in the frameworks of religion, then it must be said that in the scope of last 100 years, we haven't seen an individual that was able to predict something in a proper way, something that actually was fulfilled.
И этому есть совершенно конкретная причина.
And there are specific reasons for this.
Ну, крайне низкий уровень подготовки вот этого корпуса священников.
And the main reason is a very low level of training and competence of clergymen, priests.
И когда мы смотрим на сегодняшних священников, мы можем даже найти людей начитанных.
And if we take into account today's priests, yes, we may find some knowledgeable people.
Людей даже очень неглупых.
And quite intelligent people.
Да, но это не значит, что они способны прогнозировать будущее.
However, it doesn't mean that they are capable of prognosing future whatsoever.
Это очень специфическая отрасль.
Because prognosis is a very specific direction and area.
Да. И еще раз повторяю, что, в общем-то, никто никогда и не занимался подобного рода вещами в истории, как бы пророчества, за него никто не отвечает.
And again, let me repeat that this type of things were not implemented properly in the course of many years, because when we speak about prophecy, this is something very abstract. People do not take responsibility for their words they profited.
Если мы говорим о новых религиозных движениях,
And if we are speaking about new religious movements,
ну, это некие коммерческие структуры, созданные как бы посредством маркетинга.
it should be said that we are dealing with a kind of one-sided situation which is based on the principles of religious marketing.
И они уж точно не предназначены для того, чтобы что-то прогнозировать.
And this type of structures are absolutely incapable of prognosing something, because we can even term them as non-conventional consumer societies.
И, в общем-то, в заключение я хотел бы сказать, что я полностью согласен с Массимо Интервиньо и как бы профессором и Людмилой Филиппович, которые как бы сказали, что, в общем-то, от церкви, по сути своей, давным-давно никто никаких прогнозов не ждет.
And at this point, I would totally agree with Dr. Massimo Introvigne and Professor Ludmila Filipovic when it comes to the saying that currently, at the moment, nobody actually really expects some type of foreknowledge from the church.
Спасибо огромное за внимание.
Thank you for attention.
Great, thanks, Dr. Maltsev. And I ask Professor Maxim Lepsky to conclude this first question discussion. Please, Professor.
Добрый день, точнее вечер, дорогие коллеги. Я хотел бы остановиться на нескольких тезисах моего доклада.
So, good evening and best regards, dear colleagues. Professor Lepsky would like to discuss several issues of his report.
Во-первых, хотелось бы сказать, что от церкви наука давно не ждет никаких прогнозов и пророчеств, поскольку относится это к ненаучным антиципациям.
First of all, we should say that actually science doesn't expect anything in the prophetic issue from the church, because all in all, this shares no scientific basis.
Я согласен с моим коллегой Олегом Викторовичем о том, что церковная организация не способна выполнять такую научную функцию, которая называется прогностическая функция.
And Professor Lepsky completely shared the point of Dr. Maltsev, because actually the church composure organizations, they definitely are incapable of forecasting.
И мне бы хотелось остановиться на социологическом срезе этой проблемы, именно социального прогнозирования.
And Dr. Lepsky would definitely love to speak about that social prognosis issue.
Я полностью согласен с коллегой Вилли Готре, который говорил о том, что очень многое оказалось важным по отношению к государству. Изменения в авторитарном стиле государства. И здесь видны следующие моменты. Никто не ожидал удара по референтным социальным группам.
So Dr. Lepsky said that he shares the viewpoint of Dr. Fautre, who actually told us that it is definitely significant to see different changes in authoritative governing issue. I mean, actually, no one expected the main strike against the main profound reference groups.
Поскольку социальная дистанция была увеличена прежде всего в контактных отношениях людей.
Social distance was expanded in contact field, in human contacts.
И увеличение социальной физической дистанции привело к увеличению страха людей по отношению к друг другу.
And this expansion of social distance, physical social distance between people, actually also caused, consequently, some sort of fear of people communicating with one another.
Второй важный момент. Никто не ожидал, что глобальная угроза будет бить по предпосылочному, по биологическому. И страх стал ключевым.
And actually, the second significant point is actually no one expected that this global pandemic threat would attack the preconsecutive and the biosocial of human. No one expected that.
В результате все социальные структуры гражданского общества, как противовеса государству, оказались не готовы противостоять страху на уровне биологическом.
And as a matter of fact, consequently, all social type organizations, they were not ready to, let me say, to counter anything to this physical fear.
И та функция стабилизации, которую обычно приписывали церковной организации в социальных отношениях, не способна была и не способна до сих пор справиться с этим страхом.
And this stabilization function that usually was considered to be the function of the church, actually this function wasn't guided by the church. It wasn't guided previously, and it is not now.
В результате мы видим следующие моменты неофеодализации и мифологизации сознания.
And as a matter of fact, as a result, today we see certain aspects of new feudalizations in contemporary society.
В экономическом плане это прежде всего цепочки поставок, которые желательно, чтобы были рядом, то есть производство находилось рядом с местом проживания.
So according to the certain economic consequences, we should say that today the production points should be as close to the distribution points as possible.
И вместо религиозного сознания срабатывают мифологические ритуализации одевания масок, мытья рук, вместо профилактической функции этих действий.
And instead of certain religion society functioning, we definitely see quite different situation. We see the mythologization, we see certain rituals, we see people wearing masks, etc.
В результате социальные взаимодействия стали перемещаться из реальных в виртуальные, что изменило совершенно социальные отношения.
And as a matter of fact, this social type of communication actually merged into hyper reality instead of physical reality. And we see this actually situation expanding more and more every single day.
В результате получается следующая ситуация. Транспортные поставки выгоднее сейчас криминалу, чем государству, поскольку это уход от всяческих налоговых вещей.
And consequently, we see that today certain, let me say, certain goods deliveries are more profitable for criminal type structures rather than for government type structures.
Ограничения как возможности гражданского общества выступать с акциями протеста позволяют создать авторитаризацию государства.
Moreover, we see that the restrictions to the society issues to protest these tendencies actually reinforce the backup of the government tendencies.
И разделение как идентификация на послушные государства в пандемии и послушные церкви и непослушные стало очень серьезным идентификатором.
Moreover, the pretty significant identification of this tendency is concerned in the fact today we see the diversity, the classification of two groups, let me say, the obedient countries with obedient churches and non or less obedient countries and less obedient churches and them serving.
В результате мы видим изменение идентификаций, социальных взаимодействий и очень многих вызовов для ключевых социальных институтов общества.
So as a matter of fact, we see lots of social challenges for many social institutions, as well as identification, communication type variations.
Также было отмечено, что все уровни, средний, макро и мега уровни социологические, оказались уязвимы для микроуровня, то есть отношений в семье, в общине и на работе, которые были ограничены.
And one more consequence we should cover is that, as a matter of fact, we see that all levels of communications, I mean the micro communication up to the macro level of communication, they tend to be vulnerable to micro level of communication. For example, we could speak about the family environment of communication.
И это определяет специфику реакции на ситуацию и то, что мы обсуждали с Ильей Викторовичем еще в экспедиции по поводу необходимости новых стратегий и тактик поведения от человека до организации государства.
and actually this defines certain tendencies, certain search points. And Professor Lepsky said that actually in the previous expedition they discussed these issues with Dr. Maltsev as well, speaking about the necessity of new strategies. Actually, by strategies, we mean everything. Strategies from micro level of communication environment up to the strategies of, let me say, global government strategies.
Это те тезисы, которые я хотел представить на наше обсуждение. Спасибо.
Thank you so much for your attention. This is the basic issues Dr. Lepsky would love to point out right now.
Thank you, Professor Lepsky, for this discussion, and thanks for all professors. Now we can start the discussion around the second question of today's panel. Quite a large number of priests got infected with the coronavirus. This kind of tendency has a heavy influence on their followers and raises many questions. Dear Professor Massimo Introvigna, please start this discussion.
Thank you very much. And I would spend a good word for priests, starting from the Italian situation, because it's true that many priests died, but it's also true that many of them died because they were chaplains in the hospitals and they were working to comfort the sick in the last days of their lives. So just as many doctors died, so many priests died. And we have a case in Bergamo of a Catholic priest currently considered for a beatification process, who actually refused a respirator. Since he was an old priest, more than 80 years old, he told the doctors, please use the respirator for somebody younger. I don't need it, I would die anyway. And so he died. So, of course, there were some priests in hospitals who cracked under pressure. One committed suicide, unfortunately. But many priests were quite good and even exemplary in their work in favor of the sick. So, of course, it is true that they didn't claim any magical protection from the virus. They knew very well that they could get the virus by working with the sick or working in the nursing homes, as many also did, and they died. I will also use this opportunity to continue something Willy Fautré mentioned, the role of new religious movements, because there are actually two sides of this question. On one side, the new religious movements were scapegoated as if they were plague spreaders. Of course, the biggest case was Shincheonji in Korea that both I and Willy Fautré have studied. Unfortunately, one member got infected, was misdiagnosed in the hospital and spread the virus in the congregation, but that led to a national witch hunt, which is still going on. But there is another side, and the other side is totally ignored, that many new religious movements were extremely active in humanitarian and charitable relief. For instance, the volunteer ministers of Church of Scientology were recognized even by some quite anti-Scientology media as extremely effective in working in some areas, not only in the United States, but also in Africa. La Luz del Mundo, the light of the world, is a Mexican church under heavy criticism because his current leader is accused of sexual abuse. But quite apart from this incident, in Mexico and in some areas of United States, the Luz del Mundo was extremely active in assisting the homeless victims of the pandemic, and the Mexican illegal immigrants in United States who were suffering more than anybody else. And they didn't help only, and not even mostly, the members of their own church. They helped everybody. They helped people in the street, and they could continue with dozens of such examples because the anti-cult movements and even some governments have these negative attitudes that groups labeled as cult are only noteworthy or newsworthy when they do something bad. But actually during the pandemic, many of them did something good. They mobilized their very devoted and committed members for volunteer work and charitable work. And there is no reason to ignore this. They did a lot of good work, but the media are very much scared of upsetting the anti-cult narrative or perhaps the anti-cult movements or some extremists, so they don't report this good work by new religious movement, but this is massively documented. So in a way, the answer of the question is it's true that religion didn't produce any magical shield to protect priests or other religious practitioners from the virus and from dying. But on the other hand, we saw a massive good work by priests, rabbis, imams, and other religionists, including religionists of new religious movements, who really devoted themselves to help people in the pandemic, and many of them lost their life because rather than staying home, they still went around helping those in pain or in need.
Thank you, Dr. Introvigne. And let me ask Professor Filipovic to continue this discussion.
In Ukraine, we have no national statistics on Sikh priests, and we have such information on only from the Ministry of Health, because every morning we have how to say, interview from the Ministry of Health, and he informed Ukrainian society about the about those who are not who are sick from this virus. And not very often we have information about the sick priests. You know that in Kiev, Kievskaya Lavra, this is the biggest monastery, Orthodox monastery of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, became like hotbeds of infection. And we know about 100 monarchs who were illness from this infection. And even the main person, the main monks, namestnik, I don't know how to say in English, but the leader, the director of this Lavra, Metropolite Pavlo
Mercedes.
How to say?
Pavlo Mercedes, people called him. He was illness, but now he back to his monastery, and after this very hard time in his life,
after his allowing to go to the temple to pray and so on, he decided to continue his fight against the law, against the government, which forbidden the forbidden the liturgy in Ukrainian temples. We have no such information. I think why? Because churches are not interested in publishing such information because they believe that it will affect the church's credibility. I don't understand why this information could be uselessness for the church, but I think that we need to know the truth about all these cases in religious life. And we understand why our lovers and Pochaevskaya and Svyatogorskaya became such reasons, such hotbeds for this infication, because monarchs, they live very close to one another, and they could not be in distance in physician and in social sense. Plus church policy, very specific and I think very aggressive and very anti-social policy, because Pavlo Mercedes, he allowed to go to pray, to take communion, and you know that this is the main way, the main method how could share this infection, and this COVID-19, you know, coexist with the celebration of Orthodox Easter, and this event only help to share this infection. Very, very hard time for the church, and this is a great challenge for the church. And we have two different positions in Ukrainian society. One of the church, one part of the church, they are very obedient. They agree with all recommendations and all decisions of our government, but only the one I know, churches who demonstrates its special position in this situation. This is Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, or how we say now, this is the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And we could additional understand that all the situation is on the situation of war, Ukrainian and Russian war, and this is a very great problem for Ukrainian society, how to understand all these steps which these churches decided to demonstrate. As I understand, the progressive and oriented on the civic and European type of attitude to this situation, all these people and all this church, they try to support their believers. They try to explain how to understand the communion, how to understand the liturgy. And I know that the Greek Catholic Church, all Protestant Church, and even all new religion, they decided to stop their real communication, their real liturgy meetings with all believers. And in this time, we have a great example of volunteers of different churches in this situation. from in different forms and by different churches. I know about the initiatives from Ukrainian Orthodox Church, from Jewish organization, from Islamic organization. They try to support their believers by special product boxes, by the different literature, by the religious literature, by the different presents, special for the Eastern events. So we have the division in Ukraine between two different positions according to this virus and according the rules how to orient it in this situation. The Ukrainian one, and I think the anti-Ukrainian one.
Great, thanks, Professor Filipovich. And we ask Dr. Fautré to take part in discussion.
Yeah, thank you. First, I would say that in Western Europe, Belgium, France, and the surrounding countries, we are in the secularized societies. And there is no major tension between religious communities, whether they are recognized or not recognized, to use the terminology in force where there is state recognition of religion. So there is no conflict, no tension between those religions and the state. And so when the state decided to have restrictive measures, especially concerning a freedom of assembly, there was no complaint on the side of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church or Protestant churches. And they decided to abide by the law because they knew it was the best way to avoid fatalities in society in general, but also among the believers of their communities. So I don't think that I've seen any news saying that priests, monks, or pastors died of the coronavirus. But if there were some cases that I might not know, there must be a very simple reason for that. First, I would say there would be two categories of victims: those who refused to abide by the law, but I didn't hear anything like that. I also consulted the Jehovah's Witnesses. They said on the very first day that the measures were announced, so we stopped all assemblies and we organized webinars for our religious services. And then there might be, and there are a few that I know, a few cases, pastors that were infected by the COVID-19, and some even died. But that was occasionally, like any other citizen. So I would say that, so in Belgium, France, there was no such problem. But pastors and priests were also infected and survived anyway. Now, there are some countries, so Ukraine was just mentioned, where there were some problems. Romania, for example, in the Orthodox Church, there was a video that became viral on the blogosphere, showing an Orthodox priest using the same spoon to give the communion to each of the believers. And there were a lot of protests about that. So as I said before, there were those two attitudes of, in some countries, in some religious groups, that clerics decided to abide by the law or to put the religious rights above the secular laws. It was the case, for example, in the United States and also in Canada with some Protestant groups. Yeah, so I don't have much more to say about this question, as it is not really relevant in our countries.
Great, thanks, Dr. Fautré. And I'd like to ask academician and Professor Maltsev Oleg to continue this topic.
Спасибо огромное за предоставленное слово.
Thank you for the word, for giving the word.
Ну, я, честно говоря, выслушал прекрасную презентацию мужества священников.
Well, first of all, I've heard a very decent presentation on how priests were very courageous.
С большим трепетом слушал про мужество итальянских священников.
And I was very attentively listening to the courage of Italian priests.
Про мужество ортодоксальных священников.
About the courage of Orthodox priests.
Ну, я думаю, что кто-то все-таки должен ответить на вопрос. Да?
But I think, I mean, somebody has got to answer the question that was set.
Я думаю, что у любой религиозной концессии есть свой ответ на вопрос, почему священники заболели и почему Бог им не помог.
I strongly believe that every major religion has its answers to the question why their priests got sick and why God did not help them or help them.
И мне очень понравилось разделение этих людей на две категории.
And I'm very keen on the fact that the believers were divided into two categories.
Только я их поделил бы на другие две категории.
But I would have divided them into different two categories.
Мне очень понравилась классификация Массимо Интровини.
I like the classification of Dr. Massimo Introvigne.
Мне очень понравилась классификация Людмилы Филиппович.
I like the classification of Professor Ludmila Filipovich.
Мне очень понравилась классификация Вилли Фортре.
And same applies to the classification of Dr. Willy Fautre.
Позвольте я внесу свою классификацию.
And if you don't mind, I would like to introduce my own.
Я бы поделил их на очень сильных парней.
To put it very simply, I would divide them. First category would be very superhumanly strong people.
И людей, которые давно не верят в Бога.
And the second category would be people that do not believe in God since long.
И вот те, кто бросились подчиняться всем правилам карантина, это те люди, которые давно не верят в Бога.
And the category, I mean, roughly speaking, the ones that did obey the laws that were introduced by countries are the ones that do not believe in God since long.
А вот те люди, которые были очень сильными, и вот мне приходит на ум вот та сцена, когда, вы помните, в исламском мире все сказали, что они все равно верят в Бога, и поэтому все будут целовать и больные, и здоровые одну и ту же реликвию, да? Вот это очень сильные парни, которые все сразу заболели, 40 человек в один день, да?
And another category of people that actually did not obey the laws and that got sick, I would call them very strong people. And the bright demonstration and example of this that was in the news with one of the religious groups that said, despite, even though we will get sick, no, we are going to go and kiss the reliquien, the thing, which is the religious process.
Как вы видите, ни в другом случае никакого Бога нет.
And obviously, as we can see from the simple colloquial model, that there is no God in neither of them.
Те, кто очень сильно верили в Бога, как бы заболели сразу все.
People, the ones that actually did believe in God very much, they all got sick.
И вторые, которые уже давно не верят в Бога, которые начали подчиняться всем мирам, они не заболели, но это их не делает божественными.
And the other category, they did not get sick, but that doesn't make them divine or an adherent of something spiritual.
Обратите внимание, что люди, которые не верят в Бога, другие люди, не про тех, кому мы говорим, не про священников, они тоже многие не заболели.
And please also pay attention that other people, we are not speaking about the priests, people that do believe in God, the normal people, they also got sick.
И, как вы видите, даже если они не верят в Бога, они бывают так тоже, что не заболевают.
And even people that did not believe in God, there were also cases when they did not get sick either.
Так в чем же проблема?
So what is the whole problem?
Вы знаете, в свое время Максим Исповедник сказал как бы очень интересную фразу.
At one time, the historical Maxim Prius told the following phrase.
Да, сказал, что Бог спасает нас не без нас.
He said that God saves us, but not without us. It means that we have to also do something for our own life.
И как вы понимаете, те церкви, которые были 300-400 лет назад, и сегодняшняя церковь, это две разные совершенно церкви.
And certainly, everybody does understand that churches that did exist 300 and 400 years ago, they are not equal to the churches that we have now.
То есть, что нужно как бы сказать? Нужно понять, что современная религия в своем составе не содержит сверхлюдей.
I would like to point out that modern religions do not have competently capable people that are capable of doing, like, rainmakers, we say in colloquial language, or wonder workers.
Почему?
And here's the reason why.
На этот вопрос мы обязательно ответим, когда будем отвечать на 4-й вопрос.
And the question to this will become obvious when we will be answering the 4th question of the panel.
То есть все религиозные учения, которые сегодня существуют в мире, они безинструментальны.
So to put it differently, newly made modern religions of today do not have a certain tool set. They don't have tools.
Безметодологичны.
They do not have methodological approaches.
И не направлены на создание каких-либо сверхлюдей.
And they are not, their attention is not directed to bringing up or forging out superhumans, meaning people that are capable of doing, of implementing high level complex tasks.
Современным религиям нужна паства, а не сверхлюди.
Because modern religions, they want more adherents of their religion and not very capable people.
Хочу вам рассказать один парадокс.
I would like to share one paradox.
Если изучать документы 16-17 века,
if we study and scrutinize the documents of 16th and 17th century,
вы увидите, что такая наука, как психология, была сосредоточена вот как раз у религиозных деятелей в руках.
One may be able to see from those manuscripts that the science, which is titled today a psychology, was in the hands of religious people.
То есть, по сути, это были самые образованные люди как бы Испанской империи.
In other words, those religious people, they had the highest intellectual level in Spain of those times, in Spanish crown, sorry.
Сегодня священники приходят учиться психологии.
And when we speak of today's moments, priors are the ones who come to receive the training from psychologists.
И это значит, что пройден круг.
And in other words, it means that the religion basically reached its opposite point of degradation.
А это конечная точка деградации.
Because they went through the whole circle and came to the point of degradation.
То есть то, что когда-то было вместилищем некого знания, да, деградировало до того, что оно теперь ходит к тем, кому якобы они когда-то передали как бы это знание, учиться этому же знанию.
So basically, it turns out that things are vice versa as of today, because people that some time ago had the knowledge that was given to somebody other, currently now they have no choice but to go to those people and to study from them.
Один из выдающихся моих коллег, Алан Стив, как бы это очень знаменитый как бы антрополог, он когда-то сказал, что сегодня дети учат родителей.
One of my friends, a very distinguished anthropologist, Alan Stiff, he said that it's when children instruct their parents.
То есть, по сути своей, церковь перестала быть родителями для паствы.
And so what happened that currently modern churches, they stopped being actually parents for the adherents of that church.
То есть, это совершенно обыкновенные люди.
They turned into regular people.
И, соответственно, по сути своей, они могут болеть и коронавирусом, и другими заболеваниями, и им совершенно не стыдно заболеть коронавирусом или каким-то другим заболеванием, потому что никто от них никакой божественности уже очень давным-давно не ждет.
So all in all, correspondingly, it is totally fine for them to be sick with different diseases, with coronavirus or with something else, because nobody expects even any kind of divinity from them. People do not see them as some figures that have a link to God or wherever.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for it.
Great thanks, Akademik Maltsev, for your approach to this topic. And let me ask Professor Lepsky to conclude this question.
Спасибо за предоставленную возможность выступить. Я думаю, что здесь, конечно, очень серьезная мировоззренческая часть этой проблемы.
Well, thank you so much for passing the word. And first of all, I tend to feel that here we face a very significant issue concerning our category of life, the way we see the life in overall.
Всегда предполагалось, что духовная, а все-таки религиозная церковь представляли и репрезентовали духовность, находится значительно выше, чем биологическая, предпосылочная. Оказалось, все совсем не так.
As a matter of fact, usually it was perceived by many people that actually something spiritual is associated with a church. And this spiritual or church-like issue was perceived to be above the other levels, like the biological level, physical level, social level, but actually it all appeared to be, but it is not like that now.
Это связано, на мой взгляд, прежде всего с тем, что недостаточная подготовка теоретическая присутствует все-таки в церковных организациях. С чем это связано?
So we feel like this tendency is connected with the lack of education and lack of training in monk and prior corps. So why is it so?
Во-первых, если раньше все-таки утверждалась ценность, той, которую в свое время говорил Пауль Тилих, мужество быть, то сейчас оказалась ценность существования, сохранения себя в рамках биологической жизни, существования. И уже этим поставили под вопрос духовную составляющую.
So actually, as a matter of fact, previously we faced the tendency, the virtue or the value of courage to be. And this being was actually connected tightly with the spiritual core or the spiritual essence. However, today, this value of being is substituted with the value of existence, with the value of coping with the environment.
Ключевое психологическое напряжение было перенесено в семью, поскольку концепт дома оказался, дом совмещен с работой и со всеми другими вещами. Выход в мир только через девайс.
So the basic and the most targeting social, psychological compressor was actually benefited and contributed to a family environment. The family environment was merged with some workout environment. And this environment had only one way out, through the devices.
И у церкви оказался вызов включения в быстрые информационные технологии.
And actually, church organization, they challenged this new environment, and the challenge was connected with new technologies.
В результате оказалась не только неготовность к осмыслению процессов и дать возможные рецепты решения этой задачи, но и неготовность технологическая.
And as a matter of fact, the church organization types, they actually demonstrated that they were not ready to prompt or to share certain pieces of advice on how to react to the situation. Moreover, they were not ready to decide this thing or technologically, on a technological level.
К тому же социальные сети, в которых очень быстро распространялась информация, все-таки характеризуются часто уровнем варварства и дикости. в процессах хейтерства и высказываний.
Moreover, the social networks that are so highly, let me say, spreading and representing the information, they are significantly regarded as networks with barbaric, with hatred, with chaotic behavior of
И
participants.
к этой сфере уже подготовлена молодежь, но не подготовлена церковь.
And youngsters are actually ready to face this social network barbaric environment. However, church is not.
В результате получилось так, что те молодые люди, которые шли в церковь с благими помыслами, некоторые из них начали заканчивать самоубийством, как это было в примерах, событиях, в том числе и в Украине. Оказалось, что их вера в чистое светлое не сработала в отсутствии тех поводырей, от которых ждали от церкви.
And those youngsters who actually tend to visit church as they believed in church, actually, some of them finished and committing suicide. And we also had certain situations like those in Ukraine. Why? Because actually in this new environment of lockdown, they were not, their ideas of church, of this belief, they just crushed, and they were not ready for that crush.
И ожидание одного из крупнейших праздников Пасхи оказалось ключевой проблемой выбора. И выбор сделан был не в пользу церкви.
Furthermore, the highly expected holiday, I mean the Eastern holiday, the way it was celebrated, it targeted the new choice, and the choice that came from government, that the choice wasn't given to the benefit of church. The choice of organizing this Easter holiday was different.
И еще одно измерение хочу представить. Это вопрос, который был связан с арабским миром.
One more point we should cover is considering the Arabic world.
Когда начались проблемы с коронавирусом, помощь Арабских Эмиратов своему заклятому врагу Ирану послужила очень позитивным фактором миротворчества по отношению к другим арабским странам.
One more point we should cover is that Arab Emirates government actually helped to their, let me say, concurrent to the country they, let me say, disregard, let me say. I'm speaking about Iran, but actually Arab Emirates helped Iran in this coronavirus situation.
В результате арабский мир смог использовать окно возможностей миротворчества через религиозные институты.
And as a matter of fact, the Arabic world actually was given the opportunity to use certain peacemaking tendencies and peacemaking instruments to expand.
Что не было сделано, например, христианством в протестантском, католическом или православных, в общем-то, конфессиях.
And these peacemaking tendencies, they were covered and they were used in Arabian world. However, they were not in Catholic, in Orthodox world, etc.
Поэтому не только вот болезнь священников и монахов снижает веру паствы в эти религиозные институции.
So by this we mean that not only those priests or monks who caught that coronavirus decrease the level of belief of the flock, but the other tendencies as well.
Пожалуй, все, что я хотел пока на эту тему сказать.
Thank you so much for your attention. By this, I'm finished.
Great, thanks, Professor Lepsky. Dear speakers, please pay attention to the third issue of our discussion. The judgment of the situation by adherents of any given religion. Belief is what is meant to protect one from invisible. If any given belief was not able to guard a person, one may ask himself to what extent it is dependable, and most importantly, to what extent it is indefensible. Should one seek for something else? And we ask Honorable Dr. Intervenier to start this discussion.
Well, this is a very old problem, which in religion is known as the problem of theodicy. What means theodicy? It means justifying God. It's a very old problem. Actually, it started in Greece. If the gods are good guys, or most of them are good guys, how can we explain that the world is full of misery, war, sickness, and disease? Because the problem is not only about the leaders of religions. The problem is really about God or the gods or the higher powers, depending of what religion you are a member of. We are taught that God is loving, caring, protecting. So what about the virus? How can God allow the virus? How inoffensive, dear elderly people die? How do some children die? How can God allow for hundreds of thousands to die? These are basic problems for religions, and it is one of the tasks of religion to reconcile God and God's goodness with the dramatic nature of the world. And of course, different religions have different explanations. Christianity has the belief in original sin, which doesn't mean that if Mrs. Smith died in a nursing home is because of her personal sins, but it means that it's because of sin that death and sickness entered the world. Sin in general, there is no chain connection for Christians between individual sin and individual sickness or death. The Eastern religions will talk about reincarnation and karma, and will tell you that if you die now, it's because of something you did in one of your past lives. You don't remember what you did in the past lives, but the universe as a global system does remember. So you settle now unsettled accounts of your past lives. Some nature religion, particularly in the New Age, would say that we should respect the nature. We didn't. Our civilization is anti-ecological, and so nature and ecology avenged themselves by killing us. It's a warning. If you don't go back to a better ecology, wars is to be expected. And of course, some traditional religions would say that it's because we left God that God is now punishing us. This position has been dismissed as false by many Christian authorities, including the Pope of Rome, but other fundamentalist forms of religion do believe that our society is becoming too secular, and so God or the gods is punishing it. And we have seen this in fundamentalist Christianity, ultra-Orthodox Judaism, and also fundamentalist Islam. So each religion has a different explanation of why this is happening. And I would say that's nothing new. I would say this general question of theodicy, of explaining how we can put together a benevolent God and very bad events in the history of humanity, is a question as old as religion, and is one of the fundamental questions of religion. One final short comment is that it's much better to discuss these theological and philosophical questions than to look for scapegoats. Somebody looks for scapegoats. As we said in Korea, they say, oh, it's the fault of Shincheonji. They are so bad that they spread the virus, or it's the fault of the evangelicals in France, or it's the fault of Muslim. In India, the people very close to the government actually are calling the virus Corona Jihad, or the Muslim virus. So you see, looking for scapegoat, and of course Jews were traditionally regarded as responsible for the virus, and anti-Semitic attitudes are now coming back. So it's much better to discuss why God allows this. We will probably never agree, and the different religions and philosophies will have very different answer, than to look for scapegoat, because the real danger is looking for scapegoats.
Great, thanks, Dr. Introvindia. And let me ask Professor Filipovic to express her opinion to this issue.
Unfortunately, we have no enough sociological data for such assuming the reaction of believers to this situation. I guess that, only guess, that we have three types of reaction. And I agree with Professor Introvindia, because he described the situation which are very similar in every country, in Korea, Italy, and Ukraine, the same. And the most radical position, this is a position of fundamentalistical one, believers who decided that we trust our spiritual guides even more after this all COVID-19. And another one, those who do not agree with their leaders, and they decided that we need to change something and to live another way. We do not live in lies and irresponsibility, so we need to change the situation in our church and in other churches. But the most and the biggest part of these believers, this is traditional one and very unactive, how we say, inert mass of believers. They live like their parents, and we cannot do anything, and we will continue like our parents live, and we will trust to our tradition, our church leaders, and so on. No news, I agree, because every epoch put before us the same question, but we need to find the same answer. And we, in all situations, we will have three different parts, segments of the society. But what is very important, and I would like to ask Professor Maltsev to show us and to maybe to open us the strategy which we could propose to the religious leaders, how to overcome this new circumstance, how to be modern and very effective in this situation, especially for the youth. What remember Professor Lipsky, it's very interesting how to keep this part, because youth, this is our future, and if we now lost our youth, we have not any churches in future. So This is a good time for investigation, a good time to make a great survey, sociological one, psychological one, to answer, to ask the churches to make different focus group and to understand what was this time for their churches. I think that we could propose such maybe common project to find the answer to this question, because it's very interesting to compare how different societies, very democratic one, Asian or European, totalitarian, how they react on these on this situation of COVID-19. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Professor Filipovich, and I'd like to ask to join the discussion the Dr. Willy Fautré. You're welcome, please.
Thank you. First, I would say that human rights organizations are neutral, I would say politically and religiously. So it means that we don't have any opinion about any theology or any worldview, whether it is a spiritual or philosophical. And so I will not approach the question number 3 from the same angle, but referring to that part of the title in the questions, judgment of the situation by adherents of any religion. I think that the main concern that they had about the way the situation was faced and coped and managed by state authorities is the limitations to freedom of worship and freedom of assembly. They understood, of course, that social distancing was necessary for public health, for everybody. But there were really dramatic situations when people died and there had to be funerals, because there were no funerals. No religious funerals could take place. And those who were dying could not even get the visit of the family or a priest or a chaplain in hospital. And that was understood by the population, but that was really an ordeal, probably for the person dying, but also for the surviving families. And in my family, I had such a case where there was no funeral, and they had only 4 people could go to the cremation center, and they had to stay outside. And they didn't even see the coffin. I would not say the coffin was not open. There was no visible coffin before the cremation. Another ritual is the weddings, the religious weddings. They could not take place in the last 2 months. The same about the access of chaplains to prisons and to homes for elderly people. Again, the objective was not to introduce the virus inside the prisons. And so these were really very difficult times for everybody wanting to have access to some form of spiritual assistance. And it seemed that really in our democratic, secularized countries, that the concerns were not sufficient on the side of the political decision makers to some of those aspects concerning the rituals. It's only now, after 2 months, in Belgium at least, but not really in France, that more people can attend a religious service for the purposes that I mentioned, funerals, weddings, etc. And more and more people think that although the churches were allowed to stay open, and of course, there were no religious services that were allowed, that in any case, there should have been some more flexibility. And as people can go to the supermarket, and according to the number of square meters on the supermarket, a number of people are accepted inside. In churches, they think it could have been the same, but there were really no concerns of the state authorities about such, let's say, such possibilities for believers. So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say for the moment on this question.
Thank you, Dr. Fautré. And I'd like to ask Academician Maltsev to continue this discussion, please.
Спасибо за предоставленное слово.
Thank you.
Сразу хочу сказать профессору Филипповичу, что я готов на любой проект.
First of all, I would like to comment to the things that were told by Professor Filipovich, that Dr. Maltsev is ready for any investigation and project that was
То есть
mentioned.
исследовательский, расследовательский, любой.
But it could be any type of project, a research project or investigative project.
Вы знаете, я очень взвешенный и уравновешенный как бы человек.
As some of you perhaps may know that I'm a very consistent person.
И вот, наверное, вот эта пандемия, она меня единственное, что разозлила в последнее время.
And when it comes to pandemics, there was only one thing that disappointed me.
И меня не разозлило наличие самой пандемии выдуманной.
I would say I was a little bit even angry, and it was not about the fact that we have pandemics, but about something else.
Потому что я глубоко убежден, что эта пандемия выдуманная.
I strongly believe that the current pandemics is a set-up situation.
Но это не тема нашего разговора.
However, it is not the topic of this panel.
Меня жутко разозлило поведение правительства Евросоюза.
I was extremely angry. I was extremely outraged with the behavior of European countries' leaders.
Которые, в общем-то, как оказалось, совершенно живут не в демократическом государстве.
For the reason, as the situation has shown, and we have all witnessed, that they do not, in fact, live in a democratic civilized
И я могу
society.
это совершенно точно утверждать.
And I can make this type of statements for the reason.
Потому что в пик пандемии вместе с профессором Лепским я находился в Германии.
For the reason, in the outbreak of the crisis, I was in the epicenter with Professor Lepsky as well.
Да.
In Germany.
Франции.
In France.
Мы находились в Испании.
In Spain.
Мы находились в Португалии.
In Portugal.
То есть мы проехали всю Европу в момент пика пандемии.
And Switzerland. We basically drove throughout the Europe during the outbreak of pandemic.
И я когда приехал обратно,
And when I returned to Ukraine,
я написал книгу, которая называется «Как меня заставили изучать психологию Европы».
I have written a monograph which is titled "How was I forced to study the psychology of Europe?"
Да, потому что я собирался изучать психологию Юга Италии.
In the beginning, initially, I was planning to study the psychology of southern Italy.
А пришлось изучать психологию всей Европы.
However, because of the circumstances, I had no choice but to study the psychology of Europe.
Я там подробно написал, насколько бездарно правительство Европы.
And in that monograph, I have described in details how obnoxiously behaved the leaders of European countries.
На каком уровне духовного и интеллектуального падения на сегодняшний день находятся жители Европы.
And at what level, which is not a high level, at the low level are currently basically residents, people that are living in Europe, low level of spirituality.
Вы знаете, Украину считают страной третьего мира.
I mean, generally, it is considered that Ukraine is the third world country.
Но если вы возьмете видеокамеру и пойдете в наши супермаркеты, в момент пандемии вы не увидите, что люди выгребают продукты.
However, if you take the video camera and go to any supermarket in Ukraine during the pandemic, you will not see anybody grabbing everything from the shelves.
И вы не увидите, что поведение людей подобное животным в цирке.
And you will never see the behavior of Ukrainian people that would be like animals in the circus.
Ни один украинец себя не вел таким способом.
There was not even single Ukrainian that had behaved as other countries did.
Да. Но когда я смотрю на европейцев, то, вы знаете, я привел более 1000 фотографий, сделанных мной в Европе в момент пандемии, как вели себя европейцы.
And so during my work, in those circumstances, I have made more than 1,000 shots at how people and how Europeans basically behaved during the pandemics.
Поверьте, там есть на что посмотреть.
And believe me that, I mean, there is something to see in those images.
Возвращаясь к вопросу, который был задан, я думаю, что вся проблема в религии от рождения.
And coming back to the question that was asked by Professor Filipovich is that I think that the whole problem is in the religion, which was basically imposed on a child at the moment of his birth.
То есть вся проблема в религии от рождения, которая ведет к разочарованию.
Because usually if the choice was not made consciously, that always leads to a disappointment.
То есть, по сути своей, закон, который принят в Евросоюзе на сегодняшний день, который запрещает крестить людей как бы при рождении, он вызвал жуткие споры.
The situation when the law was introduced that in certain countries of Europe, children cannot be Christianized when they are born, this had provoked a lot of debates.
Да, наши церкви привыкли к автоматической пастве.
The reason is that our churches, they are used to have automatic number of adherents, flock.
А я думаю, что очень правильно, пусть они поборются за паству.
And I thought that that decision that would prohibit Christianize to Christian people or baptize children when they are born is a good idea, because a religion should basically demonstrate why people should basically adhere to that religion consciously.
И я считаю, что религиозная конфессия, любая данная как бы при рождении, это нарушение фундаментальных прав человека.
And I, for one, strongly believe that any religion, any religious view that was imposed on a child is, it trespasses the law.
И я думаю, что каждый человек должен самостоятельно, в осознанном возрасте выбирать ту религиозную конфессию, с которой он хочет связать свою жизнь.
And the reason is follows why I think so. I think that every human being has a right to choose whatever he wants to believe in when he reaches that age, when he's conscious and can make decisions.
И каждый человек, выбирая такую религиозную конфессию, он будет сам отвечать за свой выбор.
And every person who chooses his religious belief, he is responsible himself for his choice.
Правильный он или нет, это его выбор.
Whether it was a right choice or a wrong choice, it's his choice.
Вопрос стоит, нужно ли что-то иное искать.
And the question of our panel is about, should people quest or search for something else?
Я думаю, что поиск идет уже очень давно.
And I tend to think that the world is searching for this something new since long.
И как вы видите, поиск не прекращается, иначе откуда бы у нас появлялись новые религиозные движения?
Obviously, otherwise we would not even have had the term new religious movements if people were not searching for something else.
На любом рынке, если будет существовать спрос, будет предложение.
Because if we look at this like on economical example, then in the market, whenever you have a demand, you will always have a source.
Что касается пандемии, то это катастрофа для мира. Любая пандемия – это катастрофа для мира.
And as for the pandemics, any type of pandemics, it's a catastrophe for the whole world.
Любая катастрофа – это кардинальная причина для изменения на религиозном рынке.
And any catastrophe or a disaster is always a good reason for a radical change in the religious market.
если мы вспомним историю, то очень многие религии пришли как раз на волне пандемии.
And if we remember the history, then we could see that a lot of new religions emerge on that wave of pandemics.
Поэтому помните чуму в Европе.
For instance, we can remember the Christianization of Europe during the plague.
И так как мы сегодня как бы видим эту катастрофу,
And since we are observing this catastrophe right now,
и она многоуровневая катастрофа,
which has different levels,
и духовная,
it's a spiritual level catastrophe,
и психологическая,
psychological level,
и социальная,
sociological,
и экономическая,
economical,
и биологическая.
and biological as well.
Да, по причине того, что профессор Лепский на это уже обратил внимание, не стану как бы повторяться. Так вот, по сути своей, когда мы говорим об этой пандемии, это всего лишь репетиция.
And Professor Lepsky already mentioned the biological level, so I won't repeat. But when we speak about the current pandemics, I tend to think that it is a rehearsal.
И вряд ли вот эта пандемия, вот эта репетиция, которую мы сейчас видим, она какие-то серьезные изменения на религиозной арене в Европе и в мире произведет.
And less likely that this rehearsal pandemics would drastically influence the religious condition of religion from the global scale.
Но когда придет настоящая пандемия, настоящая катастрофа,
However, there is no doubt that when there will be not a rehearsal pandemics, but a real pandemic,
это как раз будет предтеча новой религии в мировых масштабах.
it is going to be for sure something that would originate and produce a new religion on a global scale.
Такая религия может возникнуть, с моей точки зрения, прежде всего, как альтернатива христианству.
And from my viewpoint, that type of religion that may emerge after the next pandemic would be an alternative to Christianity.
Потому что я считаю, что христианство сегодня самая уязвимая религия из всех.
Because currently, in my personal viewpoint, Christianity is the most vulnerable religion as of today.
И вот эта новая религия, которая может прийти вслед за настоящей пандемией, ее характеристиками будет низкая интеллектуальность.
And this new religion, which will come after the next pandemics, will have the following characteristics. The first is the low intellectuality,
что обеспечит массовость,
which would allow the massive followers,
и виртуальность.
and virtuality.
Да, то есть вот эти две характеристики, которые я точно могу назвать.
So these are two characteristics that I'm quite certain about.
Вероятнее всего, у этой будущей религии существуют и другие характеристики.
Probably this future religion will have also other features.
Но если можно создать из несуществующей пандемии существующую пандемию во всем мире,
However, if it's possible, as the experience shows, that people can create a pandemic from unreal pandemic,
по сути своей, как репетицию перед настоящей угрозой,
in the form of a setup, a rehearsal before the real disaster,
она вряд ли произойдет завтра.
it probably won't happen tomorrow.
Или через 3 года. Я думаю, между такими событиями промежуток обычно не меньше 5 лет.
Because usually between this type of events, you have at least an interval of 5 years.
Люди должны забыть то, что было.
Because people have to kind of forget what has happened before.
Да. Но вот когда будет уже не репетиция, а основной акт, как говорится, да?
But when it's going to be like real disaster,
я думаю, что этот основной акт как раз будет предзнаменовать вот как бы появление новой религии.
I believe that situation would produce and originate new religion.
Совершенно с иными характеристиками, которые нам совершенно непривычны.
With different features that are not typical for us, that we are not used to.
Okay. Что касается, что нам делать как бы в этой ситуации.
As for the question, what shall be done, what must be done in this situation?
Ну, во-первых, как бы мы видели, что ученые поделились на две категории.
In the first place, I would like to point out that as we have seen, scientists have divided into two categories.
Активно поддерживающие пандемию
First ones are actively supporting pandemic,
и ученые здравомыслящие, которые говорят о том, что прекратите заниматься тем, чем вы занимаетесь, никакой пандемии не существует, это все выдумки.
and the second category of scientists that are, being very consistently there, telling that you don't have to like hyper-react to all this and make things even worse. This is just a setup.
И я думаю, что ученые сейчас должны активно высказывать свою позицию.
And I believe that at this time, as never, scientists should be very active in expressing their attitudes.
Потому что большинство ученых просто на это смотрит со стороны сейчас.
Because most of the scientists and scholars are just looking at the situation from a side.
Как правительства нарушают законы и права человека.
And as governments do trespass the laws and violate human rights,
И все это объясняется некой безопасностью.
and they justify or explain this, telling that this is for the sake of people and security.
То есть никакая безопасность не может оправдать нарушение закона.
None of the security reasons can justify the violation of law.
И иначе нам нужно менять систему права.
Otherwise, we will have to change the whole system of jurisprudence.
А на это вряд ли кто-то согласится.
And I don't think anybody will agree to this.
И самое главное, что никто за это не несет ответственности.
And most importantly, that nobody is taking responsibility for what is happening.
И очень хотелось бы, чтобы кто-то за это все-таки пострадал, как человек, который организовал это все светопредставление для всего мира. Но, к сожалению, вряд ли мы этого дождемся когда-либо.
But probably we will never reach the point when somebody will take responsibility and make everything clear.
Что касается детей, то здесь как бы все очень просто.
And as for the kids or the young generation, then things are quite simple in this situation.
То есть дети, они будут реагировать так, как по сути своей их воспитывают родители.
Because younger generation would always react in the way they were brought up by their parents.
То есть при активной позиции ученых, большинства в мире, я думаю, что это можно не только остановить, но и следующую волну предотвратить.
I think if like intellectuals from all over the world, if they would be active right now, and if they would be expressing their positions, I think we would be able to make the current situation much more better and maybe even prevent the second wave of pandemic.
И если большинство ученых займут активную позицию в настоящий момент времени относительно происходящих событий, не только относительно пандемии, но и поведения госчиновников, церкви и всех остальных, то я думаю, что мы совместно можем это как бы и остановить, и предотвратить, и выработать программу, которая бы позволила совершенно спокойно больше подобного рода вещей не делать.
And when I say that scientists should take an active role, I'm not speaking only about in relation to pandemic, but also to what the governments are doing, to the position of the churches, what they are doing. And if everybody would take an active role, it would be possible not only to stop the situation for becoming even worse, but also to develop a certain program or an approach that would prevent this type of crises.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thanks, Akademician Maltsev, for the expression of your attitude to this issue. And I'd like to ask Professor Maxim Lepsky to complete deliberation of this topic. Welcome, Professor Lepsky.
Каждый социолог знает, что изменение взгляда людей связано с повседневностью.
Every sociologist is aware of the fact that the change of the viewpoint of every human is connected with his activity.
И каждый социолог начинает изучать сначала бюджет времени, который тратится на религию или на какие-то другие вещи.
And every sociologist starts his research with finding out how much time budget is paid upon his main activity, his religion activity, etc.
Когда мы находились в экспедиции, мы видели, как постепенно увеличивается объем информационных сообщений и бюджета времени в пользу пандемии.
Being in expedition, during the scientific expedition, Professor Lepsky points out he witnessed this time budget increased connected with pandemic's topic.
И увеличение бюджета времени в интерактиве, в интернете и увеличение количества времени информационных сообщений о пандемии дает возможность говорить, что это информационная пандемия.
And this time budget pandemics discussion, communication in social networks as well as in internet actually points out that this is the informational pandemics type.
Поскольку профессиональные вирусологи говорят, что коронавирус входит в систему ОРВИ, подобно и других родовых коронавирусов, вспышка которых была в 2003 году.
And as professional virus experts point out, the COVID-19 virus is a part of virus family that actually is well known during the outbreak of 2013.
Мы можем говорить о том, что все-таки информационная часть была не просто значительной, а преобладающая, и я в этом полностью согласен с Ильей Викторовичем.
Consequently, we should conclude that this informational budget increase was the most significant and prevailing one. And in this viewpoint, in this aspect, Professor Lepsky shares the viewpoint of Dr. Maltsev.
И когда мы начинаем изучать, каким образом все-таки информационная составляющая определяет веру человека, оказывается, что люди больше верят сейчас в пандемию, чем во все остальные вещи.
And starting researching the way information influences or defines the certain faith or belief of a concrete human, we should say that people today tend to believe in pandemics more than in the other aspects.
Из 5 основных экранов, которые связаны с виртуальным сознанием, а это девайс телефона, планшета, телевизор и ноутбук, все эти основные инструменты с определенной частотой нам показывают, сколько заболело, что связано с коронавирусом, и это определяет практику повседневности у большинства в наблюдении за коронавирусом.
There is a set of screens that actually defines the representation of the person of this pandemic's reality perception. I mean, such screens as the mobile telephone, PC, laptop, and the other screens are every single moment pushing the information about the quantity of people who caught the virus, who are dead already, etc. So this is the way this frequency regulates the whole concept of perception.
И люди действительно начинают делиться на тех, кто защищает свои страхи и свои убеждения, утверждает, что пандемия – это наиболее страшное зло, которое всепроникающее.
Consequently, we see the diversion in viewpoints because some people who are defending their persuasions, who are defending their fears, they claim that pandemics is one of the most horrifying aspects that we witness today.
И ковид-диссидентов, которые изучают прежде всего информационную и экономическую составляющую.
As well as we have the second group of COVID descendants who actually are researching and investigating the informational aspect or informational side of this pandemic situation.
Поэтому разоблачение информационных манипуляций является одной из существенных, важных направлений науки.
So meanwhile, we should say that exposure or demystification of this information manipulation is currently one of the significant directions of contemporary studies.
Возникает очень много вопросов к социологии медицины. Каким образом идентифицируются, фиксируются факты заболевания, смерти именно от этого заболевания? Не от гриппа, не от других ОРВИ и так далее.
So by this also we should say that there is one, let me say, one peculiar question that is addressed to both medicine experts and sociology experts. I mean, how do we identify the fact that certain person is dead by means of, let me say, COVID-19, but not due to influenza or the other type of disease? How do we know that?
Поэтому COVID-19 становится не столько фактором науки, сколько фактором веры.
So by this, COVID-19 pretends to be not the factor of science, but the factor or issue of belief, of faith.
И, безусловно, все основные изменения в вере теперь связаны прежде всего с девайсом.
And moreover, all changes that are connected with human faith or beliefs are tightly connected with devices we use.
С учетом снятия возможности общения студентов с профессорами, школьников с учителями, фактор и науки, и образования перемещается в виртуальное пространство как доминирующее.
Taking into consideration the practice or experience of communication between the teachers and the students, and between the academicians and their students, we should say that this process of studies is more and more merging into virtuality environment.
В результате в повседневности мы видим очень существенные изменения по отношению к вере и знанию.
So as a result, we see significant changes to the faith and to the knowledge experts in our daily routine.
Что создает новое поле и манипуляций, и появление неорелигий, и формирование совершенно других контуров общения.
And this actually pushes and raises the new types of, so-called new religions, new information manipulations, and new types or ways of communication.
Поэтому нахождение и веры, и знания под ударом ведет к тому, что сейчас очень большая тенденция мифологизации.
And as both knowledge and beliefs are under attack, we should say that today we have a sheer tendency of manipulation and demystification necessity.
А мифологизация всегда связана с локальными отношениями и с ритуализацией действий, воздействия на сферу неведомого. Вот, собственно, это связано с и оболванием, и низким уровнем интеллектуальности людей.
And mystification actually influences upon a person in such a way that his intellectual level is getting decreased. He is low intellectual level human from this point.
Это те тезисы, которые мы уже, и тенденции, которые мы уже сейчас наблюдаем, и вот на этом я пока хочу остановиться.
So these are the tendencies and these are the issues we are witnessing right now, and by this I am to finish my report. Thank you so much.
Great thanks, Professor Lepsky, for your opinion and presentation of your deliberation. We have the final question for today's discussion. Question number 4, the weakness. No one of the religious figures was able to tell what must be done in a time of this global threat. And traditionally, we ask Dr. Massimo Introvigne to start this discussion.
Well, we can ask another question, and this question is a deep one, and it has widespread implications. And it's whether, particularly in the Western world, we really expect religious leaders to give instructions on what to do in a national or global crisis, because the notion of secularization is very much controversial, and some sociologists will distinguish between micro, meso, and macro secularization. Now, the micro secularization, many sociologists would agree does not exist. People still in a large majority, they have beliefs about the sacred. So at the individual level of beliefs, there is no secularization. At the meso level, we can discuss, and that's the level of the institutions. Institutions in some countries are losing momentum, religious institutions, I mean, but they are still there. But nobody doubts there is a macro secularization. And what is a macro secularization is the secularization as the cultural and political level, while the great decisions in our societies are not taken by religious leaders. They are taken by secular political leaders. I'm talking of the West. Of course, Saudi Arabia or Iran are different. I recently visited Bhutan, that it's a deeply Buddhist establishment. But that's different situations from France or Germany or United States or the UK, and even Ukraine, of course. I would say that macro secularization is at work and explains why we don't even expect that religious leaders will take the main decisions and tell us what to do. We will ask either politicians or science in the case of an epidemic. So the real point is how relevant religious leaders still are. I believe some of them still manage to have a great symbolic relevance. The prayer of Pope Francis in a desert St. Peter's Square under the rain was followed by 1 billion people throughout the world. So no doubt global leaders such as Pope Francis are still capable of doing symbolic acts, but these acts are symbolic. They don't command the populations what to do or what not to do. And that's part of secularization. So we live in a post-secular world where the most we can say in the West about religious leaders is that they have a symbolic power. They do not have a real power, and they are not even expected to exert a real power. However, symbolic power is not irrelevant. Symbolic power is still very important because we do need symbols. We cannot live without symbols, as many sociologists and anthropologists have noticed. And so the function of religious leaders is not to provide commands or orders or instructions, but in a post-secular society, their function is to provide stories and narratives and symbols. And at the end of the epidemic, how well or how badly each of the great religious leaders fared will not be measured in their power of issue prescriptions or commands of social behavior, because this power is non-existing, but it will be measured in their capability of offering meaningful stories, narratives, symbols, and why not share mythologies, because that's the role of religion in a post-secular society.
Thank you, Dr. Introvinia. And we ask Professor Filipovich to continue this part of discussion.
Thank you very much. I am not so global. I have not so global ideas like Professor Introvinia. I would like to focus on Ukrainian situation, and I think that Ukrainians have received a response from our religious leaders, and the main message: do not be afraid, like the Jewish from Moses. I think that Ukrainians are trained in various catastrophes. No, the first, this is the Soviet power, the USSR. Then we have Chernobyl. Then the revolution of dignity. And the people know what to do in such very, very complicated situation. Do not afraid in this situation. And do not expect from the church a special receipts. We are interested in something else, how the church meets people's expectation. And here the church in general behaved as expected. For the one part of our society that wanted communion and Easter, they have this position, and another part who listening to the guarantees restrictions, they have another position. So our society distinguished into two parts like previous years, and nothing new in reaction of our society and reaction of our religious leaders.
Thank you, dear Professor Filipovich. And let me ask to join the discussion the Dr. Willy Fautré.
Thank you. I will address 2 points under this question, weakness related to weaknesses. I think that when the pandemic is over, or at least when it is under control, that religious leaders will have to look back at what really happened, first in their relations with the states and the measures that had been taken to limit their freedom of movement, freedom of assembly and worship, and make an assessment of the management of the crisis by the state authorities, and prepare an agenda, I would say, for the next worldwide crisis that might come up, either another pandemic or anything similar, to anticipate so restrictions to a number of freedoms, and to see if there could not be a better management in the future, a better accommodation. The second point is that the churches should look at themselves as well and see how they reacted to that limitation of their freedom. And sometimes those limitations had surprising effects and positive effects. I remember, Dr. Introvigne said on Easter Day, when the Pope alone was celebrating that important day in the Catholic and the Christian calendar, there was more than 1 billion people who attended. I heard almost the same story from Jehovah's Witnesses in Belgium when they celebrated their memorial, so the same as their Easter. And they said, well, usually we would have around 25,000 people or 30,000 people attending in various congregations in various places in Belgium. But when we did it online, it was 10 times more. So I think that the churches really have to think about the way they exist. in an environment that is dramatically and very quickly changing, with a lot of technologies of communications that should enable them to reach many more people than those who would go to the church building on Sunday from time to time. And they would reach many more people that are beyond their what they consider their horizon. So a double look, looking back at the management and maybe anticipate a better accommodation in the future, and then the churches looking inside themselves, an introversial look to see the benefits finally that they could draw with that from that nasty and tragic and dramatic experience. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Fautré. And I'd like to address this question to Demyashin Maltsev.
Спасибо, что дали слово.
Thank you for giving me the word.
Я постараюсь ответить на поставленный вопрос.
And I'll do my best to answer this question.
Вы, наверное, заметили, мои ответы, они несколько не похожи на ответы наших иностранных коллег.
Perhaps you have noticed that my answers are somewhat different than the answers of our English-speaking colleagues.
И это все потому, что я в науке больше всего ценю два вопроса: зачем и почему.
And that's all because when it comes to science, the two questions that I value the most is why and for what. What for?
Поэтому, когда мы говорим о почему церковь не взяла управление на себя и не ликвидировала пандемию, первое, что хочется сказать, что менеджмент — это очень серьезная наука.
And when we are discussing the reason why church did not take the responsibility and did not deal with the crisis, we have to remember that management is very complex science. Management is not something easy.
Вам кажется, что менеджмент изучают во всех университетах?
And it may seem to some that management is something which is taught at every university.
И вы должны понимать, что то, что преподают в университете, никакого менеджменту, никакого отношения не имеет.
However, certainly it is not the case. Things that are taught at the higher educational institutions is not what management is.
Вы можете спросить любого человека, который управляет людьми, он будет смеяться от этих лекций.
Because anybody who does factually work with people and manage a group of people, he would laugh at things that are taught at the universities as the management.
Потому что менеджмент стоит на двух вещах главных.
Management, as it is, it doesn't matter where, even in the church, it has to stand, it has to be founded on two pillars.
Это потрясающие способности руководства стратегические.
First is extraordinary abilities of the leadership when it comes to strategy.
И очень серьезная система подготовки кадров.
And very rigorous training program of the specialists.
Да. И, как вы понимаете, давным-давно мы привыкли к тому, что все управляющие решения в государствах принимают правительство.
And since long we are used to with the situation when usually governments do take the responsibility in their hands and try to do something.
И я абсолютно согласен с профессором Интровини о том, что у церкви существует некая символическая власть.
And I totally agree with Dr. Massimo Introvini in this point that the church has a certain symbolic power that, I mean, it has certain type of responsibilities that it does.
И это касается Европы.
And that relates to Europe.
А у нас скорее традиционная власть.
And when it comes to Ukraine, it is probably traditional power, not symbolic.
У нас нет символической власти.
We do not have symbolic power.
Я говорю о русскоязычном пространстве.
And I'm speaking about Russian-speaking area.
У нас власть традиционная.
It is traditional power.
Просто все так привыкли.
Because everybody is used to this way of...
И вряд ли кто-то это вообще властью какой-то назвать может.
And it is very less likely that anybody would even term it as a power.
Это распространяется только на определенные политики.
It would be relevant only for specific groups of people.
И так как мы привыкли, что все решения принимают правительство и президент в зависимости от формы управления государством.
And based on the form of the government in the country, people are used that it's whether the parliament or the president taking the decisions.
И по сути своей церковь ждала от правительства правильных решений.
And to put it simply, church was waiting from the government to receive right decisions.
Мне очень понравилось выражение Массимо Интервиния, как бы профессора, который сказал, что даже Украина.
And I really like the expression of Dr. Massimo Introvigne when he was listing the countries, and at the end he said, even Ukraine.
Я много лет находясь в Европе, всегда думаю, даже Европа.
And from my viewpoint, living in Ukraine for many years, I always think in the following manner, even Europe. I think like
Но в этот раз европейские правительства превзошли мои ожидания.
However, this time European governments even they surprised.
Да, то есть они не только не справились с этой задачей,
Not only they were capable of dealing with this task,
а продемонстрировали полную беспомощность.
European governments, they demonstrated total incapacity of dealing with this type of crisis.
И, в общем-то, я все, в общем-то, написал в книге, которая вот буквально скоро выйдет из типографии, как бы все сможете ее прочитать.
And I'm reading about all these things in detail in the monograph, which is about to be released, which can be accessed by anybody.
Поэтому я не стану повторяться.
And I'm not going to repeat myself.
А что касается церкви, мне хотелось бы сказать следующее.
And coming to the topic of the church, I would like to say the following.
То есть любая власть, основанная на выборах, она обречена.
Any kind of power which is acquired based on election process, it is doomed.
То есть, когда власть основана на выборах, это требует других способностей, нежели способности управлять.
For the reason, this type of power which is acquired based on election, when people basically chose somebody, it requires different skill set and not the skill set of managing or management.
И та власть, которая пришла к власти в мирный, автоматически некий европейский период, когда, по сути, все давным-давно отлажено, это не равно той власти, которая попала в центр войны или в центр пандемии.
And we have to all remember that the power that came during the peaceful times, when everything was nice and automatic, doesn't equal to its condition to the power which is in the crisis period.
И когда мы говорим о том, что религиозная власть никак не повлияла на правительство, никак не повлияла на пандемию, не смогла ничего предложить как бы обществу,
and when we say that religious power was not able to impact the pandemic, it was not able to give solutions for the society, it was not able to influence the government,
мы должны понимать, что это обыкновенные люди, точно такие же, как в правительстве.
the conclusion comes as follows: people that have the religious power are no different from people in the government. These are regular people.
То есть, по сути своей, эти люди пришли к власти точно так же, как пришли к власти эти же правительства.
What I'm saying is that those people, those religious leaders, they came to power just the way people in government did, by election process, by being chosen.
В настоящий момент времени уже давно у любой религиозной концессии главный критерий стремлений – это власть.
At the moment, every religious group, every religious denomination's main objective is power and more influence.
То есть никто не собирает самых лучших и не предлагает самому лучшему занять какой-то пост.
Nobody gathers the bestest of people and proposes them to become a religious leader.
Это все происходит несколько иначе.
Things happen differently.
То есть, по сути, это политика.
In other words, it's politics.
А политика не требует никаких способностей к управлению.
And politics doesn't require any type of skills to manage.
Это когда они уже приходят к власти, выясняется, что они не умеют управлять.
It's only when they already are in power, it turns out that they are not capable of doing their job well.
Потому что им казалось, что достаточно прийти к власти.
Because they thought in the beginning, to put it real simply, that it is enough to be in power.
И подобная позиция и в церкви, и в правительстве – это очень безответственная позиция.
And this type of position anywhere, be it in the church, be it in the state, is very irresponsible position.
Посмотрите на то, что делают как бы люди в Европе, правительство и так далее и тому подобное. Посмотрите, что делают на Украине. Украина точно копирует немецкий карантин.
For instance, if we look how European Union countries react, their governments, and if we look at the Ukraine, then Ukraine is basically copying and imitating the measures that were introduced in Germany.
Они уже даже не стесняются в средствах массовой информации писать, что мы смотрим на европейские страны и повторяем за ними.
They are not even, they don't feel restrained to write in the media to tell that we are looking at European countries and we are imitating them.
А почему вы за ними повторяете?
And the question is, why would you copy and repeat somebody?
Потому что мы не знаем, что делать.
And the answer is that because they don't know what to do.
Любой человек, который не знает, что делать в ситуации, он ищет за кем повторять.
Anybody or any group of people, when they don't know what to do in any situation, they will always search for somebody to copy from or to repeat after him.
То есть это вам скажет любой психолог.
And this will be said by any competent psychologist.
То есть не нужно никакого профессора, достаточно студента 5-го курса.
Basically, you won't even need a professor. It's enough to talk to a graduate student of psychology to understand this.
Да, даже при нашем уровне развития психологии.
Even at the level of our psychology development.
Так вот, в заключение я хочу сказать, то есть, по сути своей, мы когда выбираем правительство и когда мы голосуем за какую-то церковь, становясь членами этой религиозной конфессии, нам нужно задавать себе всего лишь один вопрос. Это завтра война наступит, что они будут делать?
So to conclude, if one would like to become an adherent of certain group of any entity, the question that he should ask himself is, what if tomorrow there will be a war? In case of the war, what this structure is going to do, what their leaders are going to do.
И если вы не знаете ответ на этот вопрос, наверное, лучше за эти конфессии и за эти правительства не голосовать.
And in case you have no idea what they are going to do, or you know that their response is not going to be effective, it is better not to vote for them. It's better not to become an adherent of the groups that you do not trust or you do not believe in.
И если вы даже переберете все религиозные конфессии и все правительства, и вам не захочется при ответе себе на этот вопрос ни за кого голосовать, лучше голосовать против всех.
And in case, if you, figuratively speaking, if you take a look at all religious denominations, all governments, and you understand that you don't want to choose any of them, then it's better to reject them for you personally.
Это хотя бы вам позволит, так сказать, избежать разочарования.
At least this kind of strategy would allow you not to be disappointed afterwards.
Спасибо огромное за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
I'd like to thank Academician Maltsev and address the completion of this topic to Professor Lepsky Maxim.
Спасибо за предоставленное слово. Мне, как социологу, очень понравилась необходимость введения уровня, о которой говорил Массимо Интровинья. Это микро, мезо и макроуровни.
Well, first of all, thank you for the word given, and I definitely share the point of classification mentioned by Professor Massimo Intravinia. I mean, the tendency we should speak about certain level involvement of level of micro level, meso level, and minor, meso, and micro level.
И в этом вопросе, мне кажется, социальные последствия пандемии для религиозных институтов обладают очень серьезным значением.
And I tend to believe that these social consequences of pandemics actually define very specific and significant social issues and consequences as well.
Поскольку первый удар все-таки пришелся по микроуровню, по уровню отношений семьи, общины, работы, учебы, то этот момент сразу ограничил возможности других уровней.
As the first strike or the first attack actually was faced by the micro level, and by micro level we mean the family environment, the education environment, the activity environment, we should say that this attack had its severe consequences.
Потому что ограничения коснулись прежде всего семьи, общины и учебы и профессии.
And these consequences are connected with restrictions, and restrictions were faced by family, by activity, etc. And these were the restrictions in communication process.
Второй важной тенденцией оказалось масштабирование медицинского кризиса на уровень кризиса еще экономического, политического, социального, культурного и, в конце концов, глобального.
The second significant consequence is actually about scaling. By scaling, we mean the medical crisis scaled to the economic scope.
И вот две эти тенденции, которые ударили по микро и перешли через мезоуровень на макроуровень, определили неготовность и бессилие большинства людей к этой угрозе.
So actually these two tendencies, the tendency of scaling as well as the tendency of restrictions surpassed from the micro level attack up to the, from the minor level attack up to the macro level attack. And by these actually formed these circumstances.
Поэтому возросла как раз роль государства и международных институций, таких как Всемирная организация здоровья. Но готовности политиков действовать в этих условиях оказалась минимальной, кроме решения частно-политических или частно-олигархических интересов, я сейчас говорю об Украине.
And these tendencies were highly reflected by the government organization issues as well as by the World Organization of Health. But actually, they all focused on total incapacity of management or knowing how to deal with these consequences.
Поэтому изменение конфигурации субъектов разрешения этого кризиса определило и бессилие большинства людей к этой ситуации.
And as the higher level of government and actually showed their total incapacity of finding the solution to this problem, this thing defined the incapacity of regular people who also couldn't find the solution.
Поэтому сейчас с большим интересом все изучают опыт Китая, Белоруссии, Южной Кореи и Японии, которые оказались наиболее эффективными при выходе из этой пандемии.
This is the reason such countries as Japan, South Korea, China, etc., these countries' experiences are shared and researched by the other countries, because these pieces of experience tend to be the most effective ones.
У нас очень много говорили о гибридных войнах, но никто не ожидал такой глобальной угрозы, которая соединит в себе информационную и биологическую составляющую.
The hybrid wars were actually discussed in the worldwide issue. However, no one anticipated such a global threat that is standing on the pillar of information.
Мы с Олегом Викторовичем наблюдали, когда можно было локализовать продвижение этой пандемии и как это не делалось на уровне государства.
Professor Lepsky points out that he and Dr. Maltsev together in the expedition witnessed that very time point when actually all these pandemics or epidemics, by that way, it could be released, it could be stopped, but it wasn't.
Поэтому, безусловно, сейчас ключевыми моментами являются определение позиции науки в разных сферах и междисциплинарности этих наук по отношению к изучению глобальных угроз И первый шаг уже был сделан и Олегом Викторовичем, и здесь присутствующими спикерами.
So the core component of the future studies, or the main trigger of interdisciplinary studies, is all about learning so-called global threats. And we should say, as a matter of fact, that speakers who are present now on this panel, they already set the first goal and set the first brick on the path of completing the solution to these pandemic problems type.
Поэтому особую актуальность приобретает предложение профессора Людмилы Филиппович по поводу создания новых проектов и новых междисциплинарных исследований подобных ситуаций.
By this, we point out the total significance of Professor Lyudmila Filipovich perspective as for setting the new projects, scientific projects, in order to find out, to research this field and strategize the solutions to it.
Лично для меня было очень много интересных тем, которые требуют осмысления в дальнейшем.
Subjectively, I should also cover the fact that today we've heard lots of peculiar and very interesting viewpoints that we should think about furthermore.
Спасибо за приглашение на обсуждение в этой панели. И спасибо модератору.
Thank you so much for the invitation to this panel. Thank you so much for invitation for this discussion.
Great thanks, dear Professor and academician Lepsky. So, ladies and gentlemen, our discussion has come to a final, and the conference committee thanks you for such depth and productive discussion of the problem of dogma and religion in the post-pandemic era. Let me thank the key speakers of today's discussion, the Dr. Massimo Intravigna, Professor and academician Oleg Maltsev, Dr. Willy Fautré, Professor Lyudmila Filipovich, Professor and academician Maxim Lepsky. And for all our listeners and participants, I'd like to wish, take care of yourself and stay realistic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye. Take care.